I'm delighted as President of National College of Ireland to welcome everybody today to this programme dedicated to restoring communities. I want to first of all thank Josephine Bleach. I think you will all know Dr. Josephine Bleach, Director of NCI's Early Learning Initiative. She and the team have put together this amazing programme, so we are really looking forward to all the learning that there will be over the next 2 hours. I think everybody who has joined us today will be familiar with what our Early Learning Initiative actually does, primarily focused on the addressing of educational disadvantage in preschool children, working with and through the family. And since starting ELI more than a decade ago, we have really expanded the supports that we have been providing, and we now follow the progress of the child through primary school, through secondary school, and on hopefully into further education and careers. And one of the things that we have found with all of the services that we provide through the Early Learning Initiative is that those supports are most impactful if they are framed in the context of positive interpersonal relationships. And positive interpersonal relationships are the absolute cornerstone of restorative practice. And that is why for more than 7 years, ELI has actually been providing training in restorative practices, helping individuals living in disadvantage to acquire the skills and the resilience that allows them to deal with conflict. Now, I hope you'll all share with me in this statement, but I firmly believe that we live in a wonderfully diverse country. Dublin and Ireland is such a diverse community. And the community in the immediate vicinity of the NCI campus, the North Inner City, is a huge example of that diversity. In fact, it's a concentrated example of that diversity. And unfortunately, that diversity can at times be divisive. And it is really important that we all have skills to deal with the challenge of diversity. We all know that our communities are best appreciated if we can understand and listen to the stories of others and share our own stories. And I'd like to paraphrase President Barack Obama, because he said in his own biography that while each of our stories may be unique, it is really important that we come together to a shared story of our future. And that has never been more important, and for me, really sums up what a restoring community is, the theme of today's webinar. So I'm delighted as President of the College to welcome all our guests here and all our distinguished speakers. I particularly want to welcome the chairman of NCI's governing body, Father Leonard Maloney, SJ, who's joining us here today, and also his colleague from San Francisco, Father Greg Boyle, SJ, who himself is a world-renowned leader in restorative programs, working specifically among gang members in his home state of California. We'll also, very importantly, hear from our own ELI team and the work that they do in restorative practice, what has been achieved and what they hope to achieve going forward. And we'll hear from Joy McGlynn of TUSLA, who's chair of the North Dublin Children and Young People Services Committee, and from Tim Chapman, who chairs the European Forum on Restorative Practice. And we will hear from Michael Stone, the chair of the Northeast Inner City, the NEIC Programme Implementation Board. And by way of introduction, we will now hear from the Minister of Finance, Paschal Donoghue, TD, who is our local TD in NCI Also TD to everybody who lives in the North Inner City. And I know that Minister Donoghue has worked tirelessly for this community, addressing issues such as violence and feuding, but most importantly, addressing everything that is needed to make the North Inner City a great place to live, to learn, and to work. And he also does all of that, of course, while addressing the very small issue of Ireland's finances and Europe's finances. So thank you for all of that, Minister. So we have been delighted to have the Minister's support from the very beginning of our work in the area of restorative practice, the Minister supporting that through the area-based childhood programme. So I would now like to ask Minister Paschal Donoghue to open this webinar. Minister.
Gina, thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation to your webinar. And it's, well, of course, it's customary to open up contributions at events like this, and to say that I look forward to being able to do this physically later on in the year, and looking forward to having the opportunity to meet you all again in person. As opposed to staring at a computer screen, watching yourself presented back to you in technicolor glory, and seeing little thumbnail pictures of everybody else around the screen. But I'm genuinely hopeful that we will get to a point later on in the year where we will be able to do things like this in person, and we'll be able to enjoy each other's company again. So in opening up your seminar today, I just simply want to make 3 points before I hand over to the real experts who are leading this event here today. The first one is that the Northeast Inner City Task Force and the project that is about the continued regeneration of the Northeast Inner City is all about people, and it's all about the communities in the Northeast Inner City. It's all about recognising, as you said, Gina, that we do have a very diverse, we have a very proud, and we have a deeply important set of communities in the Northeast Inner City. And we're looking to give them an environment within our schools, within our physical environment, within their families, within where they live, that allows so many of their wonderful natural qualities to get the opportunities they deserve. But we also recognise particular difficulties and challenges that we have locally. And this is why a local task force is so important. And I'll be forever grateful to Michael Stone and to his team for the amazing work that they have done on our behalf in recent years. And while we can look at physical signs of that work that have taken place, I look at, for example, the work that we have done with regard to housing in Mary's Mansions. I would look at the work that is underway in relation to our school in Savile Place. I'd look at the work that we have underway in relation to our Garda station in Fitzgibbon Street. These are all physical signs of progress, even though due to COVID, that progress had to slow down a little bit. As important as those physical signs are, the real progress that will make a difference, that will be more sustainable, is the more private and the less visible work of how we engage with families, and in particular in how we engage with young girls and boys in the Northeast Inner City. That leads on to my second point, which is the huge, huge importance of all of the work that has been done by Josephine Bleach and her team. I've had the opportunity to see this work at first hand now for many years. And indeed, we should acknowledge that the work of Josephine, Gina's College, and all of their teams actually predated the work of the Northeast Inner City Task Force. But it's work that I hope we've been able to help and we've been able to encourage. But it's work that has made and makes such a difference. And while it is work that is not as visible as opening up a new building, or making the street look better or delivering a new school. It's not as visible as that. It is work that is every bit as important and makes such a difference to so many, particularly at a time in which interventions can have such a positive and long-running effect. So I'm always honoured to be associated in any way with the work of the National College of Ireland and the work of the Early Learning Initiative and Josephine and her team, because I just think it's work of the highest calibre. But thirdly, and I hope Josephine and Michael won't mind me saying this, but I suspect they're going to go on and say it anyway. You know, when we're doing work that is really important and we really value and we believe it's work that can make a difference, it's still always so important to take a step back and say, how is the work going? Are we satisfied with the impact it's having? Let's discuss its future. And a feature of the work from the ELI and a feature of the work from the North East Inner City Task Force is the regular publication of annual reports and events like this, where we can discuss how the work is going and we can take stock of the impact that it's having. And that's why I think seminars like this are really important, to evaluate how we're doing, to hear the views of many, and to look at how we can learn. Because this work is so important, we can never take it for granted. And we can always believe that we're doing our best and work as hard as we can at that work. But we always have to be open to the feedback of others and open to evaluating that work. And that's why this seminar is really great and really timely. And while, of course, I do genuinely wish we were able to do it in person, we will get to that point, as I said, soon. And this work is so important that we can't afford to wait till later on in the year, which is why it's great that we're doing this. So I'm just going to end by thanks to you, Gina, to Michael, to Josephine, for all of this vital work. I hope everybody who's on this seminar will be able to participate in it and be able to both contribute and learn from it. Look forward to hearing the discussions that are to follow. And thank you again for the opportunity to be here to recognise your work and to say a word as the seminar begins. So hand back to you, Gina, and thanks again for the invitation.
Thank you very much, Minister, and thank you for those very kind words, which I know are greatly appreciated by all of the team here. So we really appreciate your continuing support. And I really hope that I'll be able to welcome you physically to Mayor Square and the NCI campus very, very soon. So here's hoping that that is a future that we all can bring together very, very quickly. So you mentioned Michael Stone, you mentioned the Northeast Inner City Committee and the Implementation Programme Board. This has been such an active part of the work in the Northeast Inner City of Dublin over the last number of years. And I quoted Barack Obama earlier. I'll quote another US statesman, Benjamin Franklin, who said, if you want something done, ask a busy person. And I think that must have been in the Taoiseach's and your mind, Minister, when you asked Michael Stone to actually chair the NEIC Programme Implementation Board. Because I know Michael is a very busy man, not only running a very significant business, but also putting a huge effort into his real passion in life, which is the Dublin GAA. Michael, I know that you have been a huge supporter of the work that we have been doing in this area of restorative practice, and through the Northeast Inner City Committee Implementation Programme Board, you have supported our work in restorative practice, but you have also been so involved in working to really address the needs for everybody living in this area. And we thank you for all of your effort and all of that work. We would be delighted, Michael, if you would say a few words now to us that might set us up on the rest of today's webinar. Michael, over to you.
Thank you very much, Gina, and thank you very much to both you and Pascal for your kind words. I think I'd like to just really echo what the Minister has said there about yourself and Josephine. I think if I could clone someone in the northeast inner city, it would be Josephine, because the work she does, the passion at which she delivers the work, and that's just infectious. And I've always found that working with you, Josephine, I think what you're doing with the ELI is something that's inspirational. I think I've always said it's something that we need to bring nationally, take it nationally, because I think it's a special thing. It unites people, and I find it. I just love hearing about the progress with it. I think it's so important because, we see the people down here in the NEIC who come from disadvantaged backgrounds, and how they basically are nearly gone before the start line in terms of their education. And I think it's so important that we support this. And I've always said that anything that we can do here, and we've been very lucky with the funding we have received from the Minister and from the government since I got involved. I've actually never been refused something down here in terms of funding. I think that's very significant. I've said that down here. I actually don't believe that money is the main issue down here. I think it's more collaborative working that's required. And people like Josephine and yourself, Gina, and this sort of initiative, there's more of that required in a structured way. And that's what will get us the success and improve the people's lives here. And I feel very strongly about that. But I'd just like to maybe just go through something, just a few, about what we're doing in the NEIC for people who don't maybe are on the webinar who don't know. I mean, as I said, I was asked by the Taoiseach to take the chairperson's role of the NEIC Programme Implementation Board back when it was established in 2017. That came about following the publication of the Mulvey report. Ciarán Mulvey spent a lot of time in the NEIC, and he produced that report called Creating a Brighter Future in Dublin's Northeast Inner City, otherwise known as the NEIC, which was written in response to the underlying socio-economic problems in the area and the ongoing feud that many people will know about. And I think it's important to acknowledge the Gardaí in the area who we work very closely with, and the fantastic job they've done in that period to curb that feud. And I think that's something that it needs to be acknowledged here today as well. Great work being done there. And led by the PIB and the NEIC initiative represents strong collaboration and close cooperation with the local community, local businesses, Dublin City Council, and government department and agencies. And our collective goal is to make the NEIC a safer, more attractive and vibrant living and working environment for the community and its families. And since our inception, we've made significant progress in enhancing the lives of people living and working in the NEIC. Successful urban neighbourhoods foster a sense of community and active citizenship. The NEIC is a complex and diverse area with residents from many different places, with different cultures and traditions. And establishing and maintaining the connections to build mutual understanding and trust can be very challenging, particularly at the moment. And during the last 15 months, that's been very, very difficult. I think we all agree that values act as a glue that tie all the varying pieces of work the NEIC are doing and put it together. And since the establishment of the NEIC initiative, stakeholder engagement has been one of its key successes and remains a priority for the NEIC Programme Implementation Board. We support inclusive engagement with the community. I think that's very, very important. And that's with everyone in the community. Direct involvement of local people who live and work in the area is part of the engagement and the engine for change. Restorative practice was one of the recommendations of the 2017 Mulvey report. An overarching goal was the creation of a restorative community which enables people from diverse backgrounds and perspectives to listen to, understand, know, and respect people, as well as meeting each other. Directly related to the NEIC's goals and those outlined in our 20 to 22 strategic plan, restorative practice supports an inclusive community engagement approach that empowers all those who live, learn, and work in a community. And by encouraging restorative processes within local families, services, schools, youth, and community projects, it is very much aligned to our strategic value of trust and our guiding principle of building a culture of community trust through support, compassion, respect, and honesty. Our ambition in the NEIC is to continue to build on the work to date, implement the NEIC Strategic Plan 2020 to 2022 and the remaining actions set out in the Mulvey report, focusing on long-term sustainable outcomes, which operate in an integrated framework and add value to the existing service infrastructure. I'm delighted to state, as you will hear later, that the NEIC Restorative Practice Initiative trains, mentors, and supports hundreds of local children, young people, professionals, and parents each year to develop restorative interpersonal relationships and conflict resolution skills. While much has been accomplished, it is timely to develop a long-term future strategy. This webinar is part of this strategy development, where we have the opportunity to take stock of what has been achieved, as the Minister said, in the NEIC so far in relation to restorative practice and what is needed to ensure long-term sustainability and embeddedness. And I look forward to hearing the outcome of the discussion today. Thank you very much, Gina.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you for all your support and all your work. And I think in your words, you have set us up wonderfully for the rest of the work that we're planning to do as part of this webinar today. So I would like to thank Michael Stone and I would like to thank Minister Paschal Donoghue for your very kind words. And now I am going to pass over the chairing of the remainder of this webinar to the Assistant Director of ELI, Katrina Flood. So over to you, Katrina. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gina. So for the past 7 years, we've been leading a community restorative practices project within the Dublin's Northeast Inner City. And this has led to a restorative neighbourhood approach. In the ELI, we use community action research as a method for both programme design and programme evaluation. So to illustrate the restorative practices journey in the Docklands to date, I'm going to use these community action research or CAR cycles to talk through the project. So first of all, we started off with CAR cycle 1, which was from 2014, and this was an inquiry stage. So as part of the area-based childhood programme, we identified restorative practices as an approach that would fit our community. We raised awareness within the community and we offered restorative practices training to all managers and staff working with children and young people in the area. We then moved into CAR cycle 2, and that started in 2016. This was also an inquiry stage, but at this point we incorporated the Northeast Inner City's Brighter Futures project. So we built on the work that had been done in cycle 1, and we expanded training to include children, young people, and parents in the NEIC area. By June 2017, approximately 43 organisations, which was about 330 staff in the Dublin Docklands and East Inner City, had received restorative practices training, and they were supporting over 1,100 children and young people within their services to use restorative practices. We then moved into CAR cycle 3, and that started in 2017. And this was an engagement stage through multiple conversations. So again, we built on the work from cycles 1 and 2, but then we introduced restorative practices parenting courses, self-care workshops, and a more structured approach to the mentoring and support that we offered to organisations. By March 2020, we had run 14 parenting courses and 9 standalone workshops, and we had a total of 175 parents attending these sessions. And then finally, in 2020, we moved into car cycle 4, and we're currently in that stage still. And this was an embedding stage. And through a process of doing organisational reviews in the community, we identified that organisations were now beginning to embed restorative practices in their culture. And as we are all now very much aware, the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic in March 2020 meant that all our face-to-face training, workshops, support and mentoring had to flip to a virtual delivery model. And while this did prove to be challenging, it gave us a space to pause, review the restorative practices journey to date, and plan a strategy for the next 5 years. I will now hand you over to Kate Darmody, and she's the researcher here with the Early Learning Initiative, and she's going to go through some of the key learnings over the past 7 years.
Thank you very much, Katrina. So I'm just going to take a couple of minutes just to briefly try and capture some of our key learnings from the past 7 years. I'm just going to address a couple of points. I'm going to try and briefly capture some of the key learnings from the data we've collected over the past 7 years. So firstly, I'm just going to address a couple of points on the impact that we have seen of the restorative practices training. And then I will just address some more recent evidence that we have seen in the impact of restorative practices in the community from the organisational reviews. So as Katrina mentioned, there's been a wide range of training that we have engaged with restorative practice in the NIC over the past 7 years. Right, so firstly from this data, I'd just like to highlight one point we noticed is the successfulness in the training in improving the participants' ability to manage conflict. And so professionals and parents that have engaged in the training have tended to note dealing with challenging behaviours as an area of high need for them, and the desire to improve one's ability with conflict has consistently been a primary motivator over the years. So we've measured this in the data by asking participants to self-rate their ability to manage conflict across different groups, from children and young people to other colleagues and community professionals, when they begin the programme and again when they finish training. So this data has indicated improvements in participants across the board. And the percentage of those rating themselves as very poorly at managing conflict tends to decrease by approximately 30%, and those of very high ability increasing by approximately 13%. But as the other speakers mentioned, and I'm sure you all know, that restorative practice is about much more than just conflict resolution. And another area that we have seen the training has impacted in participants is in enabling the participants to understand the multiple benefits that can be achieved through restorative practices and how they can implement this in their life and work. So particular note for us with professionals has been in them learning how restorative practice can enable them to develop understanding and effective relationships, which is just such a key element of restorative practices. And also in skills they can learn to help them strengthen the community and create safer environments. And then with the parents in their training, it has been mostly evident in their understanding of the importance of self-care and self-awareness. And then on average of 85 to 100% of the participants completing these trainings are confident that they can implement these skills at home and in the workplace. And here I just also like to note some of the evidence that we are seeing on the impact of the community. So this graph illustrates the data taken from the organizational reviews. And in these reviews, the staff were asked to rate the level of implementation of restorative practices within their organization from level 1, exploring and preparing, up to level 4, which is full implementation. So as no organization is yet at full implementation, you're just seeing levels 1 to 3 illustrated here. And as you can see here in this data, it's showing a clear relationship that as restorative practices becoming more embedded within the organization, the staff and managers are seeing higher levels of improvement in behavior, increased learning, and positive relationships, and an improved social and emotional intelligence. Sorry, I just finished this. And I'd just like to leave you with a couple of comments from these organizational reviews, and just highlighting how the restorative practice has impacted the children and young people in the NEIC in bringing about cultural change, restoring relationships, managing conflict, and continuing to improve connections with sustained use. So thank you all very much. I hope you could hear that, and I'll hand you back to Katrina now.
Thank you very much, Kate. I'm now going to talk to two of the restorative practices coordinators who are working in the ELI to spread the restorative practices approach to the whole community in the Dublin Docklands and East Inner City. Emma Weekly is the restorative practices coordinator who trains practitioners, corporate volunteers, and young people aged between 10 and 18. And Sonia Goulding is the restorative parenting coordinator who runs parenting courses and the self-care sessions for parents of children up to the age of 11. And she also runs self-care sessions for community professionals. So Emma, I'm going to come to you first. What are you most proud of over the course of our restorative practices journey?
Thanks, Katrina. So something that stands out for me over the course of the last 7 years is that we've been able to bring together diverse and different local experiences, whether that's through our learning and development or support and mentoring. So within our training and our workshops, participants come from a wide range of settings, both formal and non-formal education settings, so early years educators, primary, secondary school settings, youth service settings, as well as multiple community organisations, TUSLA, the Child and Family Agency, An Garda Síochána, sports associations, local residents, and probably lots more. So likewise in our individual mentoring visits to services, as well as our communities of practice, we engage with a really diverse range of organisations and also individuals. Our intention is, and continues to be, the creation of a restorative community within the Northeast Inner City, and hopefully encourage others, especially here today, hearing about our journeys to do the same. So I'm really proud of the diversity of voice and experience that has joined us over the past couple of years. An example maybe of in the last year was the restorative response to the impact of George Floyd's death and the international reaction to that. So as well as being home to a diverse range of organisations, Gina, as you mentioned, the Northeast Inner City is also a wonderful example of Ireland's multicultural society. And because we have created a space within the community for everyone in the community, we were able to respond to a real-time event and its impact and discuss it in a restorative way. But we were only able to do that because of our restorative community and the fact that it includes lots of different sectors, but also includes people of colour, Black people, people from our traveller Mincare community. For those of you outside of Ireland, that's our Indigenous ethnic community, and people of differing faiths, beliefs and backgrounds. So I think that's something I'm particularly proud of and equally eager to build on further.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Emma. And Sonia, I'm going to come to you now. What are you most proud of over our restorative practices journey?
Thanks, Katrina. So as you already said, Katrina, earlier, the Restorative Parenting Programme is running for the last 3 years as a support for parents and families. A really successful element of the programme, which is also unique to a parenting programme, is the incorporation of self-care into it. An emphasis is placed on the important role that a healthy relationship with the self plays in parenting. After all, the relationship we have with ourselves is the most important one. It sets the tone for all other relationships. So this is particularly important within the NEIC community, where there's a great deal of trauma experienced within family relationships. So supporting parents to recognise the importance of putting on their own oxygen mask before putting on their children's is really important. Self-care has proven to be a very valuable element to the programme. Participants, have fed back that it's been very valuable to them. It really reflects the high level of value gained from it being a central component to the programme. We also run self-care CPD sessions for community practitioners. It supports participants to grow their self-awareness, resourcing themselves with a toolkit for building resilience and protecting themselves from the effects of emotional and psychological stress. So thanks for that, Katrina. I'll hand them back to you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Sonia. Emma, I'm going to come back to you now and ask you, what has been your biggest challenge over the course of our restorative practices journey?
Okay, thanks. So as both Michael Stone and Pascal Donoghue mentioned, the intention of this Restorative Practices project is to create a cultural change within the Northeast Inner City, to empower citizens, whether they live or work or learn or just visit our NEIC, and grow their capacity to build and maintain relationships. So our aim is to create communities of care and give people the skills, the desire, and the confidence to problem solve, to de-escalate conflict, to repair harm in their lives and their communities when necessary. And we have 3 C's that embody our Restorative Communities project: our college, and we're so lucky to have our NCI colleagues supporting our project, our community who drive this project, and our corporate organizations who partner with us so enthusiastically. So our aim across the entire program is to bring awareness to and include restorative values, Michael, that you mentioned, that create those safe and happy and sustainable and vibrant communities. And a big part of that is that collaboration with our corporate partners. So an example of a challenge maybe is bringing this to life. And one example in particular, and I've noticed Maxwell there from Arthur Cox Law Firm, is our Opening the Door Between Corporates and Community project that we've piloted with Arthur Cox over the last number of years. So this project brings together young people from the NEIC through our local youth services. There's a few of them online as well, and Arthur Cox corporate volunteers. And they've joined us through ultimately their corporate social responsibility initiatives, but I think more significantly through the relationships that they've built up over the years. So the project centres around young people and adults experiencing worthwhile opportunities to engage with each other in restorative ways. And if our community members, especially those youngest members, are really expected, and we do have high expectations for them to participate as citizens in an equitable, democratic society, then they really deserve genuine restorative culture in which they have the right skills, the right knowledge, and the right attitudes to work with people from diverse groups, locally, nationally, and globally. And this is what this programme offers. As I mentioned, Arthur Cox have led the way, and other corporate partners have come on board, including NTMA and Kennedy Wilson. So I think the challenge is to build on that and create structured and systemic opportunities for young people to see this corporate world as one that they can be part of, and equally that this corporate world is part of their community as well.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Emma. And Sonia, what has been your biggest challenge over the course of our restorative practices journey?
Thanks, Katrina. Yeah, I suppose one of the biggest challenges for the programme is engaging parents who have complex and high needs. Even when they do engage, it's often the case that these parents drop out of the programme early. Understandably, there's many factors which cause this. I guess fear of being seen as not good enough, childcare, readiness, the group setting, fear of judgment, fear of the unknown. I liaise with other community services and family support coordinators so that we can work together to try and engage some of these parents and mitigate against some of these obstacles. One of the approaches we've used this year is offering one-to-one support. It's emerged as a solution to engaging some of these parents and is offered in some cases. This can work really well. I guess it meets the parents where they're at, and it tailors the supports to meet their needs. A parent I worked with recently needed parenting support, but didn't feel comfortable joining the group setting. She was in a particularly difficult set of circumstances with a difficult start to motherhood, coupled with parenting alone. She was experiencing difficulty managing her own emotions, alongside then trying to support her child with challenging behaviours, which is very tough, very difficult. We worked together to identify strategies to support her to bring awareness to her own emotions and care for herself, so that she was better resourced and equipped then to support her child when he was experiencing difficult emotions and presenting with challenging behaviours. So that's worked well in trying to address this challenge. But as I said, the challenge to engage the parents with the complex needs is a challenge that we're always trying to kind of mitigate against. Thanks, Katrina.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Sonia. And Emma, back to you again. Can you highlight one area of focus for your work for the next year?
Just one, Katrina. Okay. So one of the many things that I'd like to focus on for this coming year is to further develop the support and mentoring element that you had mentioned of our restorative practice programme. So firstly, I think it's important that we continue to see the progress in this embedding stage that Kate spoke about, of bringing our restorative community towards its goal, and that is to be a sustainable and supportive restorative neighbourhood. And secondly, given the year we've all had, I think it's vital that we're supporting and modelling restorative practices everywhere we can, to support people to support themselves, as Sonia has mentioned, their families, their staff and their co-workers, and just the community as a whole. So to achieve this, individuals and organisations need to be supported in progressing from our introductory getting started knowledge of RP to upskilling and moving forward with their training and their facilitation skills, before ultimately advancing those skills and that practice to a level where they themselves are trainers and champions within our NEIC. So in addition, the managers, principals and leaders, again, lots of which I see online today, across the NEIC, who are committed to becoming restorative organisations themselves, they also need to be supported. So a strategic plan to support all community members in embedding RP in their practice, in their organisations and in their way of being is going to be really important in sustaining restorative practices in the NEIC. So whether it's training peer mentors from local schools to be RP youth advocates, or it's bringing adults along a continuum of restorative learning and development, I really can't wait to continue to build those relationships, connect restoratively and support RP in the NEIC going forward.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Emma. And finally, Sonia, I'm going to come back to you. Can you highlight one area of focus for your work for the next year?
Thanks, Katrina. Yeah, as I've mentioned self-care already, I'd like to focus on incorporating self-care into some of our other restorative practice programs and initiatives, support the community to restore themselves. I suppose in light of the pandemic and the potential trauma experienced, and again, for some, particularly in the NEIC, who don't have protective factors against trauma, now more than ever, self-care tools and strategies are needed to resource oneself and build resilience. Self-care CPD training has already proven to be really successful and a valuable support to both ABC program coordinators and with our own ELI's parent-child home program home visitors, who engage in self-care sessions 3 times a year for the past 2 years. The feedback from this has been that it's really valuable and benefiting participants both personally and professionally. As I said, the relationship with the self is the foundation for all other relationships, so it plays a key role in restorative practices. It supports participants to develop self-awareness, understand the role of boundaries, and to adopt self-care strategies, which are all key components to building and sustaining healthy relationships. So all of this supports the creation of healthier relationships with self and healthier relationships with others. So I suppose, yeah, embedding self-care into more of our restorative practice programs this year will be a key focus. Thanks, Katrina.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Sonia. Thank you very much, Sonia. Restorative practice is an approach that can equip communities with the tools to engage in respectful but honest conversations that can help to build healthy restorative neighbourhoods. As we are all too much aware at the moment, there's going to be major challenges for all communities post this pandemic. But this is going to be even more difficult for communities that have struggled with socially challenging behaviour and resulting disconnection from community prior to the pandemic. As Sonia noted, self-care and the importance of the relationship with self has always been key to successful relationships. The pandemic has brought this to the front of everybody's minds. And as Emma has mentioned as well, building relationships with young people across the community to enable them to achieve their life, education and career goals will continue to be highly important going forward. I'm going to thank our participants today, Emma, Kate and Sonia, and I'm going to hand back to you now, Josephine.
Thank you, Katrina. And I'm delighted to welcome our next 2 speakers because you've just heard what happens in the Northeast Inner City, and we are excited to hear what happens in other parts of the world. In a few minutes, Father Gregory Boyle, who's just joined us from Los Angeles, so welcome. We'll talk about restorative communities. But first up is Tim Chaplin from Belfast, who has wide experience of restorative practice and is the current chair of the European Forum for Restorative Justice. Tim, would you like to start off?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Josephine. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so as Josephine said, I'm speaking from Belfast, so this is a bit of an outsider view. I think it's only really since I've been invited to speak here and Emma and Josephine had a chat with me that I've become more aware of the work in the northeast inner city area of Dublin. It's so impressive, I must say, just what I've heard already, the work that you've done. I love the approach you took, this sort of inquiry, engagement, embedding process you followed. It was very restorative, and I love the sense of achievement, and the commitment to engaging with diversity, self-care, inclusion, all very promising. I mean, before this, for me, frankly, Dublin was a place to come and see good concerts, theatre, a football match or a rugby match, meet friends, and enjoy the nightlife. This has given me a completely new perspective. What I want to do in this brief presentation is, I suppose, to try and understand what restorative means and what community means and how do they connect. And as well as being involved in the European Forum for Restorative Justice, I'm a visiting professor at the University of Strathclyde. So I'm fairly familiar with another great city, Glasgow. And I'm going to start with a couple of photographs of recent events in Glasgow, which I think illustrate different aspects of the notion of community. So here's the first one. Now this is a street in Glasgow, and you may have picked it up in the news. The Home Office, the British Home Office immigration enforcement van turned up on this street to pick up some refugees that they believed were living illegally in Glasgow. And as you can see, the whole community turned out to protect them. And what they were sort of chanting in this thing is, these are our neighbors, let them go. So this to me sort of sums up one version of community, which is inclusive, and there's a sense of solidarity, and there's a sense of activation when there's a crisis. Here's another image of community, again from Glasgow. And this is the celebration of the Rangers supporters having won the league for the first time, I think, in 10 years. And a great sense of passion, belonging, identity, and what they were probably chanting or singing there is "We are the people." And the distinction I'm making is, one is an image of solidarity with, and the other is very much community as a sense of identity. You can see many signs of identity there in that photograph. And this to me is one of the, if you like, tensions in community. Is it an inclusive community, which having listened to people, I think you're aiming to be an inclusive community, one that celebrates diversity? Or is it very much an identity type community, which is quite exclusive of others, people who are not the people that are identified by identity? The result of sort of community as identity is illustrated in this photograph from Belfast. This is a photograph of our so-called peace wall. And this is the sort of logical result of community based on identity. There's a polarization, there's conflict, there's violence, and then walls have to go up to separate people in order to protect them. And I'm assuming that is not somewhere you want to go. Moving on to restorative, for me, the word restorative is defined by its values. I think Mick Stone was mentioning that earlier on. And these are the values that the European Forum have come up with. And I'm not saying that the only values are the best values, but they're just the ones we've chosen. Respect for human dignity, solidarity and responsibility for each other, justice and accountability, and truth through dialogue. It seems to me if you can get those as part of your approach to restorative communities, then that brings people together. Unfortunately, the other sort of community of identity and polarization tends to respect human dignity as long as you're one of us, not if you are the other side. It tends to be a sort of solidarity, which is solidarity against rather than solidarity with. And again, ideas of justice are distorted because in a way that sort of sense of community gives you a justification for not treating everybody equally and justly, and allows you to discriminate and be oppressive. And similarly, the polarized version of community depends not on truth, but on prejudice, on, if you like, fake news, lies about the other in order to maintain the distinctions. And so these are, I'm saying this because this is, I guess, the sort of dynamics that anyone who's working towards a restorative community is considering. The concepts of, I'm going to be a bit academic for a moment, please forgive me, a bit of theory, looking at the concepts of solidarity and justice. An Italian philosopher called Roberto Esposito makes the distinction between immunity and community, which is very relevant given the pandemic that's going on. He goes back to the Latin to say that both words come from the core munus in Latin, which means basically an obligation. Immunity is about being exempt from an obligation. Community is having obligations to other people within society. And so the idea that community is actually defined by mutual obligations, not territory, not identity, not common interest, but a sense that we have obligations to each other. Whereas immunity, as Esposito says, is a perversion of the idea of community into its opposite. It erects walls, as in Belfast, rather than breaking them down. So the drive for immunity, which people feel they take shelter, if you like, in people like themselves, is motivated by solidarity against somebody. And of course, as we know, looking at the political scene these days, this sense of wanting to just stick to your own can be manipulated politically. The drive for community, in my opinion, is for solidarity with people and forms the basis of good social relations. And community is activated by encounter, by meeting, and by dialogue, whereas immunity is nourished by disconnection and discrimination. So where do community and restoration meet? Through our obligations to each other. Obligation, I think, is an important concept within the restorative practice idea. And is I think, summed up very nicely with this Irish proverb. I'm not an Irish speaker, so I'm not going to attempt to pronounce it. But for those of us like me who don't speak Irish, it means it is in the shelter of each other that people live. It seems to me that in striving to create a restorative community within Northeast Inner City, you're trying to encourage that idea that we have obligations to each other, we want to shelter each other, whether it's through self-care or through mentoring, through the appreciation of diversity, etc., the things that you've already mentioned. I want to just open it up and look at some models in Europe for activating restorative communities. The English model tends to be, let's train all the practitioners in public services to be more restorative. Lots and lots of training of, professionals. Now that improves public services, it improves relationships between the professional and the client, but I'm not sure it really gets to transforming community. It just means that people are getting a better service. Interestingly, in Italy, it tends to have been issue-based. The first sort of restorative community I got involved in was in the island of Sardinia, where again, I work with colleagues. And the issue that promoted a restorative community there was the government decided to build a high security prison beside a small town. And the residents got up in arms over it. They were very anxious and very angry that they were doing that. And so the practitioners brought the residents together with the prison authorities. And then eventually when the prisoners arrived with them, they had restorative circles. And that immediately eased the tensions between the two. Now that issue then led to the mayor saying, that was really successful. We should be doing that in relation to other issues, like in schools and in the community generally. And so this town, Tempio Pausania, has become, it's a small town, but it's become a restorative community. And I visited there to work with the schools, with judges, all sorts of people who have embraced this restorative idea as a municipal value. The other example from Italy, so you could say that Tempio Pausania was a reaction to an event that then became a more proactive strategy. In the north of Italy, around Como, they have been working on developing a restorative community for a while. And then COVID came along. So they had a proactive approach, which was about bringing citizens together to talk about any issues they had. But when COVID came along, then they were ready to respond. And they've been doing some really important restorative work because it was the north of Italy that was hit hardest, maybe in Europe. And there was a lot of resentment towards the government, the way the government were very slow to react and protect both the citizens and the health professionals, both of whom there was high rates of death. And so they're organizing circles of ordinary citizens and frontline services meeting together to talk about the harm, the trauma, the suffering, but also to talk about the injustice of it and how the government could be held more accountable for their responses to crises such as a pandemic. So two interesting things. That one was reactive, the other was proactive, but their proactive strategy enabled them to react very quickly and in a very relevant way to a crisis. The other ones that I've been involved in have been in Belgium and France, and they're relating to polarization. Now, interestingly, in Leuven in Belgium, which is a restorative city, they don't have a lot of problems. It's a prosperous city, it's multicultural, it's a university city, but there isn't a lot of problems. And they quite wisely have said, we want to keep it that way. And so it's important not to wait till a crisis occurs, but to improve the relationships between the different identity groups within the city and increase dialogue. So they're looking at community restorative circles, not problem-based, but just relationship-based, building relations, so that if anything happens, the city can respond effectively. In France, where I was working, it's a suburb called Val d'Oise, and there's a lot of conflict between immigrant young people and the police. So they're looking at restorative processes to ease that tension between these two groups. So you can see there's a variety of different models, all of them valid. And I can see elements of each of those in your initiative in Northeast Inner City Dublin. Connecting people to restore just relations is the European Forum sort of slogan. And in a way, I think that sums up very briefly what this is all about. In restorative justice, we constantly talk about the importance of relationships. What we sometimes say or neglect to say is that there are relationships that aren't good. It's not just relationship generally, it's what's the quality of relationships. And I think those values sort of sum up what is a good relationship: one of respect, one of justice, one of solidarity, and one of truth, honesty. So it seems to me the function of a restorative community is to connect people, to ensure that those relationships are built, sustained, and if something threatens them, that you can respond quickly to undo the unjust threat to just relations. So to me, a restorative community is ready, willing, and able to act when necessary, when there is a threat to community life. However, that might be a small thing or it could be a big thing. And it seems to me for a sustainable model, you need, and I think you've got all these things in place to some extent. What Dominic Barter, who does a lot of work in Brazil, in the favelas, working with community in a restorative way, would call a restorative system. And I think that is certainly trained people, but it's also having good relationships and good organization. There needs to be some sort of organizational hub that keeps the whole thing going. It doesn't just happen on its own. And then that there are trained champions throughout the community who can be quickly mobilized, both to tell the hub, if you like, there's something going on in my community that needs to be addressed restoratively, to promote a restorative solution when there's problems arise, and perhaps to facilitate the processes as well. And I understand you would have a range of champions in different areas of the community and in different sectors, like the police, the education, etc., so that they can be quickly mobilized if there is a problem, as well as the ongoing business of sustaining, building relationships. But I think I wouldn't underestimate the importance of issues, if you like, the reactive part, that the community is based on relationships, positive relationships, but it's also not just a passive thing. It can be activated to address issues. And I would say, look out for issues that bring the community together. You know, whether it's, you know, an incidence of hate crime. Now, partly that's a police matter, but in my studies of hate crime, the surrounding community is very important in terms of the bystander effect, if you like. If a hate crime happens to some sort of minority and they see no reaction from the community, they interpret that as indifference. Nobody cares. We're on our own. And that's the antithesis of what I think is a restorative community. Nobody is on their own. Everybody has been sheltered. Everybody has obligations. So, you know, to be able to mobilize sections of the community, not just the police, not just the formal system, but to mobilize ordinary people to say, this crime was not conducted in our name. We support the victims. Just some examples. I came across this just this week and I just thought I'd put it up. In Denmark, there are libraries when you can borrow a person instead of a book. The goal is to fight prejudice. Each person has a title like unemployed, refugee, bipolar. But listening to their story, you realize how much you shouldn't judge a book by its cover. I think it's a very interesting idea. So when I talk about activation, it could be a big protest about something, or it could be something small on a human scale like that, just to encourage connection and dialogue, particularly amongst people who would not normally meet each other. And that seems to me part of the restorative vision. The issues that you've already addressed is the importance of children and the importance of, you know, restorative practices in relation to wherever there are children. I've talked about polarization and hate crime, crime and antisocial behavior. These are some of the tough areas, but I think a community grows by addressing the tough issues in its midst, as well as the sort of softer ones. Any conflicts that, it could be neighborhood conflicts, just two neighbors falling out, or it could be an intergroup conflict. Institutional abuses too. In deprived communities, quite often institutions of some sort overstep their power and can be oppressive. It's important that those things are addressed. And of course, finding sources of funding to sustain your efforts is key. I've heard so much that you've achieved over the last 7 years, and I just think you're just ready to take off. So I'll close with that image. Now I've lost my cursor. Yeah. So Garamagat, thanks very much. Keep in touch.
Well done, Tim.
So thank you, Tim. Very inspiring and very challenging. You just have told us what we have to do. We now have to work out how you move. And I suppose for a lot of it, it's finding the right people, which we're lucky to have in terms of the community and the services and people working together in the NEIC. And hopefully your talk will inspire us about the kind of things we need to do next. I now want to introduce Father Gregory Boyle. He's founder and director of the Homeboys Industry, which is a gang intervention and rehabilitation program in the United States. I suppose when you are rehabilitating people who are either more attracted to gangs or has been in gangs, it's challenging. And I suppose my question to Father Gregory, how do you get people from really diverse backgrounds to actually live with and respect each other restoratively? So Father Greg, I hand it over to you.
Thank you very much. It's great to be with you. It's kind of early here. I've had my coffee. I would have joined you earlier, but that would have been impossible. But I wish I was there with you because I love my homeland. So, you know, the poet Wallace Stevens says, we live in the description of the place and not in the place itself. So listening to Tim right now, we long for a different kind of image and paradigm. So we don't want to settle for the description of the place. We really want to hold out for the place itself. And the place itself is a community of kinship such that God, in fact, might recognize it, a place where there is no us and them, there's just us. Mother Teresa diagnosed the world's ills correctly when she suggested that the problem in the world is that we've just forgotten that we belong to each other. So how do we stand against forgetting that? You know, in Glasgow, that image that Tim had of, you know, they are our neighbors, that sense that we are connected to each other. And so it's important in every society to kind of stand at the margins, because that's the only way the margins get erased. And at Homeboy, you know, we want to stand with the poor, the powerless, and the voiceless, but we also want to stand with the easily despised and the readily left out. We want to stand with those whose burdens are more than they can bear, and those whose dignity has been denied. So you stand as a symbol in many ways with the demonized, so that the demonizing will stop. And you stand with the disposable so that the day will come when we stop throwing people away. So Homeboy kind of wants to be the front porch of the house everyone wants to live in. So we're quite large, and we've been around for 33 years. And there are 120,000 gang members in LA County, 1,100 different gangs. So there isn't a single gang member in LA County who doesn't know where we are, who we are, and what we do. Our program doesn't exist for those who need help. It's only for those who want it. So they have to walk through the door. They come in varying degrees of readiness, but if they walk through the door, we call it the therapy of the swinging door. if they walk through the door, they're held, they're red carpet treatment, you know, ticker tape parade. They come into our community with what psychologists would call a disorganized attachment. A mom was either frightening or frightened, and you can't calm yourself down if you've never been soothed. And so we provide that in a community of tenderness and a place where they feel palpably cherished. If it's true that the traumatized are more likely to cause trauma, it's equally true that the cherished person will be able to find their way to the joy there is in cherishing themselves and others. So the first thing you do, I think, is you provide a safe place. And then the work can begin. If they feel that the place itself is a sanctuary, then ultimately they will become the sanctuary that they sought. And then they'll go home and they'll present that sanctuary to their kids. And suddenly, for the first time, you've broken a cycle. And so they come to Homeboy barricaded behind a wall of shame and disgrace. And the only thing that can scale those walls is tenderness. So we choose to cherish with every breath we take at Homeboy. And it works. So 15,000 folks a year walk through our doors. And we have all these services, you know, all the usual menu of things, from anger management to classes to, we have a school which began, again, 33 years ago in 1988. We have, you know, therapy, everybody's in therapy. We have 5 paid therapists, but we have 49 volunteer therapists, including 3 psychiatrists. We have free tattoo removal. No place on the planet Earth removes more tattoos than we do. We have a clinic with 3 laser machines, 1 paid physician assistant, but 43 volunteer doctors. And so it's a place where they discover a resilience that they didn't know. So no kid is seeking anything when he joins a gang. He's always fleeing something. So all of you are and I find folks outside of the United States know the ACEs study better than we do. So the Adverse Childhood Experiences study, you know, I grew up in Los Angeles, the gang capital of the world. I'm a 0 on the ACEs just because I won all these lotteries, you know, the parent lottery and the zip code lottery and the Jesuit education lottery and the mental health lottery. And that says more about my own white privilege than moral superiority. But every man and woman who walks through our doors at Homeboy is a 9 or 10 on the ACEs. So you want to somehow help them excavate that wound so they can become friends with their wound. If we don't become friends with our wound, then we are tempted to despise the wounded or revile our own brokenness. So Homeboy was started when I was pastor of the poorest parish in Los Angeles, a place called Dolores Mission. And it was nestled in the middle of 2 huge public housing projects. I think you call them estates there. And we had 8 gangs at war with each other. And the Los Angeles Police Department called it the place of the highest concentration of gang activity anywhere. So I buried my first young person killed because of the sadness in 1988. And 3 weeks ago, I buried my 247th, a young man named Christopher. Not from that community, but I run a very large gang intervention program, so I get asked to do that as a priest. And so we started a lot of things, a school first, and then a jobs program, and then we couldn't find enough felony-friendly employers to hire gang members, so we started things. A maintenance crew, a landscaping crew, a crew to build our child care center at the church, all made up of rival gang members working side by side with each other. Then we started the Homeboy Bakery, which got a lot of attention. And now we have 10 social enterprises, again, rival gang members, African Americans, Latino, Asian, who work side by side with each other in a recycling factory, a silk screening factory. We have several restaurants, including one at the airport at American Airlines terminal. We have a diner at City Hall in Los Angeles. Anyway, so these are all training programs, but everybody stays with us for 18 months, which is sort of parallel to the 18 months it takes for a child to attach to the caregiver, is sort of a similar experience for our population. So if prisons are how a society practices exclusion, a Homeboy wants to highlight our practice of inclusion. We imagine a circle of compassion, and then we imagine nobody standing outside that circle. And so we choose to dismantle the barriers that exclude. But I think our diagnosis has grown more and more correct over the years. Initially, we thought it was about employment. Nothing stops a bullet like a job was our motto. And probably 15 years in, we started to see that an educated gang member may or may not reoffend, and an employed one may or may not. But then we discovered that it was our absolute guarantee that a healed person will not ever reoffend and return to prison. So our emphasis became healing, and it's the relationship that heals and restores people to the truth of who they are, that they are exactly what God had in mind when God made them. And so we announce a message to the city of Los Angeles. What if we were to invest in people rather than futilely try to incarcerate our way out of things? So, and it's interesting, as the mention of self-care, you know, it's a thing we deal with here for sure, and I certainly got very perilously close to burnout in my early years. And until I discovered that you go to the margins not to make a difference, but so that the folks at the margins make you different. You don't go to the margins to fix or repair or save or rescue people. You go there so that your hearts will be altered. And so if, you know, gang members run the place now, and occasionally they'll say to me, I'm burning out, I need a break. And I always kind of say to them, I say, well, then that's an indication that you've been doing this incorrectly, because you're trying to have successes. You're trying to make an impact. You're trying to change, fix, and rescue. And then it's about you, and it can't be about you. And then you will be depleted if you've allowed it to become about you. But if you go to the margins to be rescued and to have your heart altered immeasurably, then it's about us. And that's eternally replenishing. I learned that lesson the hard way, probably 20 years ago, when I thought it was about me, and I thought it was about success, and I thought it was about measurable impact. And I thought it was about rescuing and saving. And once I decided that it ought not to be, then it's liberating. I've never been close to burnout since. I've been exhausted, but exhaustion is fine. But burnout is just an indicator that you've allowed it to become about you. That's my own personal take. But in the end, you're trying to accompany people while they come to a deep and abiding sense of their true selves in loving. I had a homie named Jermaine who was 30 years old and had spent half his life, more than half, in prison. He came into my office and he said, I made a discovery today. And it wasn't so much a discovery as it was a retrieval of an image from his childhood. He said he was 9 and he was lying on his stomach close to the TV, and he could see through his peripheral vision that somebody had stepped into the room, and he sees his mother. She's standing in the doorway and her arms are outstretched. And then as he brings focus to bear on her, he sees that she has deeply and profoundly slit her wrists, and blood is coursing onto the floor. And she looks at her 9-year-old boy and she says, see what you made me do? And the next day he was taken from her care and put in foster care. Most telling of all was that his brother and sister were not. So at 9, he went to foster care. At 12, he got jumped into a gang. And at 17, he was raised the rest of the way in our penal system until he was sitting that day in my office, African-American gang member, sobbing. He had been with us maybe 4 months at that point. So I asked him, Jermaine, what was your discovery? And he said, I discovered today that I have always preferred my rage to my shame. And because he made that discovery, for the first time in his life, he was able to forgive his mother for having been mentally ill and forgive himself for having once been a 9-year-old boy. We have to create places where people can heal, where they can be held, where people can hold up the mirror and remind them of the truth of who they are. Not hold up the bar so that they measure up to your expectations, but you tell them that they are unshakably good, which is their truth, which is everybody's truth. And then what you've created is the place itself. And you don't settle for merely the description of it. So anyway, it's a privilege to be with you this morning, and I wish you every blessing as you do this incredibly transformative work.
Thank you, Father Gregory. That was really inspiring and puts us to shame about what we do here. I think we try to fix maybe rather than heal. Well, we do try to heal, and we try to make sure it's not about us, but I suppose it is quite difficult. And I think the idea of looking to the other and looking to the margins and supporting people to us is really important. So now what we're going to do is to move into the breakout room. So we have a few we need to consider. Rhonda will put them in the chat. It's 7 years since the NEIC began. What can we celebrate? And thanks for all the lovely comments. We improve on. What are the next steps? How can we sustain and work? And thanks very much to our speakers, because you know, you have just given us such, I suppose, a vision and ambition to go towards the next stage. It was also wonderful to hear them talk about all the different initiatives like ACEs and practice. And the other piece we have here in Ireland is MEHEL, where people come together to support children and families. And I suppose from all, how do we integrate all of that? And what would we like to have achieved by 2025. We'll also put up the evaluation forms for people, mainly because in them we have a few questions, like the questions I'm answering now, and allow people to give their own comments. So thank you once again to all our speakers. We really appreciate your comments. Delighted we're recording this, because I think to get the true meaning, we need to watch it over and over again. So looking forward to hearing from the breakout rooms. If we ask one person in each in each room to just feedback, and if somebody would take notes, we'd really appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you all for staying with us. Delighted that you have, I suppose, just in terms of feedback from the breakout rooms. So I was in one breakout room. Interesting to hear people's perceptions. I think the whole thing of restorative justice and restorative, I suppose, communities and restorative practice comes up, and I suppose how you move away from where somebody has to take on the blame to where everybody is sitting down and talking about the issues. We also heard about how maybe the next step is to look at, I suppose this would have come from Father Gregory's, of how to move people and young people out from criminal behaviour like drug dealing, and how to support them to move out of that. The complexity of the issue, and then even in terms of rebuilding relationships between young people and their peers, and I suppose rebuilding some of the social skills and connections that we have lost during COVID. So if somebody else would like to go next.
Yeah. So we spoke about I suppose what we've achieved is it's out there and people are hearing the words restorative practice, restorative community, restorative neighborhood. So that was in and of itself a bonus. And it was the manner maybe in which people were hearing about it, and the vibe that people were getting from it was beneficial and impressive. The thing we can improve on is extending our reach, looking to further embed in schools and services, in particular maybe looking at older children and young people and focusing and refocusing on them. Our next steps in relation to maybe that extending and expanding, the idea of maybe re-engaging, there's a brand new cohort of principals, managers and leaders in the NEIC over the last couple of years that maybe missed out on our original training of managers, leaders and services, so that if they could be re-engaged with, when it's safe to do so, and in a way that doesn't overload them, given we're still experiencing a lot from COVID-19 restrictions, and that blended learning could still be an element of that. So where there's live and recorded opportunities for people to engage and access both training and support as well. And in relation to what we're hoping for in 2025, we started with world peace, and then we scaled down a slight bit and said if we could have maybe 5 or 6 maybe schools or services that in and of themselves were those hubs that Tim had mentioned, that they were committed and it was a fundamental part of their organisation to be a restorative one. That and world peace.
Thank you. Another group?
Yeah, we'll jump in next if that's okay. So myself, Katerina, Kevin and Phil were in a group, and we discussed some of the what to celebrate and some of the challenges that might come. So the celebrations is this really, it's absolutely fantastic. There's some really powerful people here. There's some guest speakers that are coming in from different areas, and that's a real testament to ELI and the wider community in order to support that. And another sort of massive success will be the way it has been brought to the community and embedded within the community. And then there's a lot of little pockets of restorative hubs and communities, and they're really manifesting, and it's really good. And something that we think is really powerful is taking the taking the subconscious to bring it to conscious, so that becomes subconscious again. So using the practice without necessarily thinking. Kevin in particular would have spoke about healing, and if you look at healing as a process towards restoring, so still using the language, using the dialect, but maybe just changing the name in which that we're using. Some of the challenges will be how. So ELI would be looked at as a fantastic support mechanism for the whole community. And if you ever need to talk about anything restorative, we can pick up the phone to Emma, Josephine, or any of the lads over there, and it's really, really good. But if you can sort of, rather than picking up the phone to maybe some of the lads, we can pick up a phone to a colleague, which where the relationship is, so we can sort of get it out there like that. That'd be really, really good, really important. So again, really, really good. And the success is massive. 7 years is not a long time. I know sometimes it can feel really long, but it's really, really embedded. It's gone right across the whole community, and it's a testament to you all over there. What you have done. There must have been on 80 participants here today, this morning, and you probably could have sold that 5 times over. So absolutely amazing, brilliant, and great work. I don't know whether anybody in my group wants to jump in case I missed that. You're more than welcome to. Cheers.
Okay. Can I have another group, please?
I can feedback for our group, Josephine. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Thanks,
perfect.
Kate.
So I think we were chatting away and didn't get to cover all the points, but one area where we kind of felt that ELI and NEIC can really celebrate, kind of Jonathan touched on it there as well, is just how many people we've reached with the restorative practice programs and the buy-in in the community for this. I think particularly noted as well was direct work that we've been doing with children and parents, which is always a challenge, and how we even kind of always try to find ways to sustain this, even like facing challenges like with moving on to virtual programs. In the next steps, it was noted that it's really important for us to continue to share our data and share messages. I think Claire particularly noted that the MS system of mentoring and training could be kind of like to share the data that could be something that could be replicated elsewhere. And that is really important for us to keep finding ways to share that with everybody in the community. And also kind of on integrating different services. I know there've been kind of experience of working in Ballyfermot, in working in kind of blending youth programs and restorative practice programs, and I found that very successful. And also the importance areas we thought it would be important to integrate with child incorporating non-violence resistance with the restorative practice, and also for NEIC to link in critical incidents to support the community to respond. So sorry for just a few messy notes, but we got cut off before we could finish.
That's all right. I think we all did. That's the joy and the challenge of these groups. So is there anybody else that I think there's two groups. So.
I mean, Josephine, I'll come in there for the group that I was with. I suppose just to say that, again, it was a short amount of time, and we'd all introduced ourselves we spent 5 minutes introducing ourselves. We were all from different organised, so we Douglas from Ballyfermot, Chapel Lizard Partnership, we Joe from RP Limerick, Mary Ivek from Canberra. So we, I guess we all kind of told each other a little bit about where RP's at for each of the different organisations we're with. I suppose when we looked at kind of next, so it was difficult to maybe delve into the NEIC consideration. But in terms of the next steps, I suppose one of the challenges that was spoken about was, I suppose, to kind of short-term funding and planning, I suppose, maybe being a factor in what's next, and planning for the next stages when you're not sure where the funding might be coming from. So that was a commonality amongst us. Does anybody else want to come in there from my group with anything they want to add?
And thanks to people for putting things on the chat, and thanks too for people who have come as far abroad as Canada, the US, Australia to join in. It's been really useful. We are looking for people to do individual interviews, so if you are interested, please let us know and we'll get back to you to continue the conversation. And thanks for the people who have offered to continue it. Joy, would you like to close?
Yes. Yes, thank you so much for the invitation. I've really enjoyed the session and I've learned a lot about restorative practice, which I needed to do. I am the Tussle Area Manager for Dublin North City, and I also chair the Children and Young People Service Committee for Dublin City North. And I'm on the Programme Implementation Board that Mick Stone chairs, and I also chair the subgroup for family wellbeing, where this project kind of streams through. So it was great for me to hear, you know, the acknowledgement, I suppose, from Minister Donoghue and from Mick Stone of the value of this work, because sometimes it can feel a bit hidden and it can be hard to highlight the impact of it. So it was great to have them kind of validate that. I've always felt, for someone who's privileged to be in my position, you know, I have kind of two key roles. One is all of the obligations that come with delivering a public service, you know, and all about planning and identifying need and governance and finance and freedom of information and data protection and all of those things. But the even more important one is to clear the way for this kind of work to take place, for relationship-based work that really has a meaningful impact on children, young people and their families. And I know, if I could borrow just from my colleagues in Barnardo's, who have the tagline that every childhood lasts a lifetime, you know, I often think about that more in the kind of negative impact, like the adverse childhood experiences, that they can last into adulthood. But actually, if we think of it differently, it is that those investments that are made in childhood can have long-term impacts on the outcomes for children. And certainly giving children and young people the skill of being able to manage conflict in a way that's constructive and restorative is something that will stand to them long term. And so I really just want to acknowledge the fantastic work that has been done. It was really clear from all the presentations, but particularly listening to Sonia and Emma and Katrina, the skill, the dedication and the commitment that the team in ELI have, and in the community and the network that has been developed in order to promote this approach and to use this as a way to teach children, young people and their parents healthy ways of resolving conflict. Because what we know is the impact of unhealthy ways of resolving conflict we can see both from a family point of view and from a community point of view. So I know that the team are very much taking stock and looking at the strategy for the future and what we need kind of in terms of long-term sustainability and embeddedness. So I want to thank everyone for contributing to that, and I think some good links have been made today, and as Josephine mentioned there's potentially going to be some one-to-one interviews to kind of get people's views, because I know we didn't have lots of time to talk today. So I think some good links have been made. Certainly myself, my colleagues on the PIB and in our subgroup are really delighted to be part of this and want to offer whatever support we can. And I just want to thank you all for attending. So that is me. Thank you, Josephine.
You're welcome. And thank you, Joy. And just to say, in terms of Joy, when the feud started back in whatever it was, 2016, and we were worried about supporting families and children through it, Joy was one of the people that supported us in terms of setting up the critical incident group, and I suppose continuing and building on the work that had already been going on through the ABC programme. So things don't happen because of one person. I think it happens because of a lot of people working together and supporting children and families. And I want to thank everybody who has contributed to the seminar, the people, you who came and who participated so readily in the chat and in the breakout rooms. I want to thank our speakers. I want to thank Gina for introducing it. Pascal Donoghue, who the first time I met Pascal was back, I think, 2008 or 9. We had invited him to some award ceremony for children and families. And he had got lost in terms of talking to people. And there was a book sale on at the time. So between the books and the families, it took a bit of searching to find him. But I think it was an indication of his interest in what's happening in terms of children and families in the area. Similarly with Mick Stone and his commitment and the time he puts in terms of the Northeast Inner City, again, it's truly inspiring. Again, people don't work without a team. So Katrina Emma, Kate, Sonia, and to Rhonda and Fergal behind the scenes, and the rest of the ELI team who makes it happen. And to all our community members and stakeholders across the community. I think, you know, each of you play a part. ELI just doesn't belong to NCI, it belongs to the Northeast Inner City and beyond. And to our speakers who truly were inspirational, to Tim Chapman, such a wonderful perspective, such a challenging perspective, but that's what we need, is challenge to help us do better. And similarly with Father Gregory and the whole notion of people being at the heart of it, relationships being at the heart of it, and the importance of healing and not trying to come with your own biases and prejudices and whatever and trying to fix things. And to remember that it's all about, for us in ELI, it's all about the children, it's all about the young people, and it's all about the parents. And finally, as I said, to Joy and to all of you. So thank you all very much. We really appreciate it, and have a good day. Bye.